Next, please welcome to the stage Ms. English, DHA's Director of Personnel and Administration.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about Defense Medical Human Resources System Internet, DHITS. And that's really just to kind of start that conversation about some of these some of these back office challenges that we talk about and ways to really reduce the burden on our healthcare providers so that they can focus on what is most important to our mission, and that's taking care of our patients, of doing that fourth generation that we've talked about. So if we go to the next slide, here's our agenda. That's me. And learning objectives, we're really just going to talk a little bit about availability, why that's such an important concept in the back office and in kind of the strategic aspects of managing a comprehensive workforce with many different capabilities, many different specialties, and different categories of labor. We have military personnel, civilian personnel, contractor personnel, and it's important to understand how we manage that workforce to get after that healthcare workload in our MTFs. And we'll talk about the current DHITS that we're wrestling with every day in our facilities, what it does do for us, how that data is used today, some of the limitations that we're facing with that program, and I think the fun part is kind of discussing what can be those big ideas to kind of move forward with a way to modernize and to really get to a better approach for how we use this information, this data. So healthcare personnel availability, what is it and why does it matter? There's some definitions there on the slide, but I think one of the other things I would expand on about the importance of availability and this kind of measure for us, it's really looking at the amount of time in a month that a given individual or employee is really theoretically available under a set of assumptions about their typical work week, their assigned hours, and it's where we're taking deductions, we're accounting for that legitimate time that's just unavailable to really focus on the care for the patient and the health care requirement that we have in our facilities. And it's not that this non-available time is not valuable. In many cases, it's very valuable, it's necessary, it has to do with training and breaks and leave and military personnel doing readiness and operational duties and tasks that are important to that fourth generation that we talked about. But at the same time, what it means is when we generate or determine a workforce requirement based on that projection of workload and all of the mission sets and everything that we're planning to accomplish in our facilities every year, we're going to do everything we can to maximally hire, recruit, retain, assign all of the people that we need for that mission. But the amount of work that those people can do out of this towards this core effort is affected. And so availability is important to helping to understand what that equation looks like and how we can continue to strategically make the right decisions about how we resource our workforce and support our workforce. And so in terms of availability, just recently we concluded our third cycle of the Human Capital Distribution Plan, which is a collaborative process between the DHA and the military departments to do that projection on what do we expect our workforce to be in the coming year in our MTFs, and to understand the gaps that we're going to experience where we might not have enough availability of that workforce to do some of that care for our patients. And that gap becomes the risk that we have to assume and the risk that we're trying to mitigate, that we're trying to balance with support from our purchase care network, and or understanding care that's just not going to happen for patients, and that in turn has impacts on force generation and readiness. So when we talk about availability trends, they've been declining for a number of years. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. And the data is what the data is in terms of this availability. But over the past few years, as we've gone through medical reform, the reform of the military health system transition, we've seen divestitures of military personnel. There were some decisions made in the military departments a number of years ago that reduced some of their requirement and positions and inventory of medical personnel that were aligned to or focused on delivery and MTFs. And a lot of those decisions have been reversed, but it's going to take time for the military departments to kind of rebuild that pipeline and to restore some of that capability. And they've made tremendous progress with this in the last few years, and in this cycle, we're seeing some of the examples of that. COVID pandemic had a significant impact on our availability and on the health and composition of our workforce as a whole. This year, a lot of executive orders that have driven a lot of changes to the federal workforce, and that has kind of amplified the attrition that we tend to experience in our profession. And frankly, healthcare labor inflation, right? The last number of years, we've seen a significant rise in healthcare salaries and a really aggressive competition for talent, for healthcare talent across our system and across the national healthcare system. And so there's been some stabilizing of healthcare labor rates nationally, but the competition for talent and for all of those capabilities continues to be a very strong indicator and challenge that in turn affects these availability trends. So let's talk about Dimmer's Eye and why do we use this system, this program, why is this data important? Well, you heard Dr. Quartz and Admiral Case talk a little bit about the back office, about the need to understand things like labor cost accounting and medical coding, and a lot of things that surround the healthcare provider-patient relationship and set of processes in our facilities that are very important to supporting many things we need to accomplish for our system. So the key overview here with Dimmer's Eye that we have today is it's a very old system. It's about 20 years old. It was established in the early 2000s to do that centralized tracking of personnel labor hours, and it looks at several data components. It's, of course, accounting for manpower data, that organizational structure that's in a hospital or clinic, and the positions, the billet data. It's also looking at that demographic and personnel data, and it's doing labor cost assignment, so allocating the time that folks are spending in the hospital supporting patients through that MEPR system and really calculating that data to help us understand availability. The data is used for a number of things, as I talked about, in terms of our managing our system. So obviously a primary focus is labor cost assignment, understanding and being able to apply our resourcing, our funding to our facilities in the right way based on the workload that's being generated and the availability of those personnel. But we also use it for a lot of business planning. As I mentioned, our human capital distribution plan, Notably, calculations for MERC-F, which generates nearly $2 billion in revenue for the system. So this is a critically important piece of data that Dimmer's Eye is contributing information towards to help with that revenue generation. It's tied to a lot of the measures that you heard from Ms. Julian about in terms of healthcare administration, provider productivity. It helps us with managing our alignment of faces to spaces and lots of other things. And there's a lot of outbound data from this system that supports other key clinical and business systems. But we have a lot of limitations with Dimmer's Eye, and you heard about limitations in many of our other data sets, whether it's dealing with clinical quality and safety and patient care, or on the healthcare administration side. And so it's no different with some of this business data that we're trying to collect. The quality of the manpower and HR data, of course, is a challenge, and those are things that we have continued to work on through major initiatives to refine and baseline our workforce planning requirements and how we're doing strength management and really managing the personnel information. The accuracy of time reporting, it's a manual process. Providers are spending a lot of administrative time filling out time cards. So not only do they have all that work every day to do their clinical notes, you know, we've talked about a lot of ways to take administrative burden off of them with ambient dictation and other technologies. How can we give more time back to our providers to take care of the patient, to focus on the healthcare needs? Similar challenges with some of this critically important administrative data and information that we need to be able to collect about what our folks are doing during their day. But right now, a lot of it's a manual process. The technology has become quite outdated, so there's a lot of work that Pat Flanders' team has to do to kind of keep the system patched and running and supporting our teams. And challenges with resources and redundancy. And that's probably one of the greatest transitions that has occurred over time as newer technology, as we have cracked the code on many, many things with our data. We talked about how we were able to finally get to data for leapfrog and for many other things that we measure and monitor to continuously improve how we support our mission. And in fact, many of these other more sophisticated systems collecting data are collecting data there's a redundancy there between what is in those systems and what we're asking people to report through Dimmer's Eye. So let's talk about the future. We really want to focus on a provider and a patient-centered approach. So the idea of being able to offload some of that administrative work is really tantalizing for us. We feel like we're right there around the corner to be able to move in the direction and pursue a modernization strategy that would give this to our providers and to our patients. And I'm very hopeful for this because I think about some of the analogies and some of the examples that I've witnessed in other places. So about 12 years ago, I bought a Volvo in Sweden. And I went to the factory in Sweden to pick up the Volvo, and I was given an amazing tour of their facility. And they had really revamped the way they were approaching manufacturing cars. And a lot of it was an investment in technology and data at every step of the process, and with every employee involved in the process, to really fine-tune their productivity, their quality, and their flexibility and agility. So they were manufacturing about 6 or 7 different models of cars on one line. Their entire workforce was multidisciplinary, integrated, and multi-skilled, somewhat like what we see in a healthcare setting or system, right? Our specialists, our hospitalists, our administrators all work as an integrated and cohesive team to take care of a patient. And what was really, oh, sorry, I think we lost time. Lost the sound for a minute. And what was really fascinating was the degree to which there was a hands-free, automated way of tracking and measuring not only all of the car parts, but all of the labor activity that was being expended by the workforce in that facility. And that data was feeding the manufacturing team's ability to see where they were with their resources, their productivity. Did they have a quality issue? Did they need to speed up, slow down, or respond or flex to a change in the environment or something happening in the facility? So I feel like we have these kinds of opportunities with the data, the technology, the possibilities that are out there with respect to Dimmer's Eye. And that's one of the analogies I like to think about in terms of how we can get to a more provider and patient-centered approach. So near term, obviously, we have to continue to improve and sustain the current program that we have. We'll continue to work on policies and procedures and things that we can do to try and improve ease of use and automate where we can. But that's really to kind of continue to mine that data for all the important uses for which we need it from our teams in the facility while we really look to the future. And longer term, we're really looking to be able to better articulate and document the kinds of requirements we need for this capability, understand alternatives, look for those provider and patient-centered solutions, and then be able to develop the tools or the technology that will help us get to that kind of end state. So a few things we're working on right now is really thinking about the concepts for the data and thinking about what is the data that's already out there in Genesis, in other systems of record, and what are our possibilities for reducing the need for manual entry, for ways of capturing that data, automating that data to create that picture and to help us understand and see the availability of our staff. And are there ways we can do some of the calculations in separate data environments or in a more integrated way so that we're really leveraging the power of the information and in a way that is going to center on that provider and on that patient as opposed to increasing an administrative burden. So those are just a few thoughts on the topic of Dimmer's Eye, and I welcome any questions or comments that you have. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for the presentation on Dimmer's Eye. My name's Dr. Andrew Huang. I'm one of the users of the Dimmer's Eye Oracle BI setup. And we do a lot of analysis in manpower and tracking with billets regarding deployability for the Navy. So a couple comments. One, regarding the improving and sustaining current Dimmer's Eye. I think one of the things that we have issues with the system is that there's a lot of quirks regarding trying to pull a query and get any information out of there. I remember sitting down and having to do a Teams chat with one of the technicians who work with Dimmer's Eye a lot, and he said things like, make sure you add this filter, and make sure you're pulling from these tables and not these tables. Otherwise, we run into issues where the data keeps there's like duplications in the data. It basically keeps running, and we never actually get anything out of it because it basically just crashes on its own. So my recommendation for this sustainment is maybe to have a more streamlined user guide for it, as well as a very robust data dictionary, especially one that's similar to the MDR data dictionary, because I feel like that is sort of a gold standard on what data dictionaries should look like. My second comment regarding where to move forward with it is maybe consider what MHS Genesis and Genesis is doing as their infrastructure, and seeing how much you can kind of lift off of those ideas so that we're not really reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, great comments, and I'll definitely take back your suggestions on the user guide and the data dictionary, because I know the team is working on a lot of those pieces, because that does become important during our sustainment phase, that policy procedures, user guides are easier to use and really help us navigate within the system that we have as effectively as possible. With respect to your comment on MHS Genesis, you're spot on, and in fact, that's one of the things we're kind of launched a bit of a pilot initiative or effort through our CDAO, Dr. Caban. He's going to be helping us with this to really kind of get in and look at a lot of that data structure, architecture, the information, to understand where we have a lot of this information already being captured, and what the feasibility is of being able to leverage that in an automated way to produce the information that we need, that we're currently trying to get out of our dimmer's eye. Yes, thanks.